All right. Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to the show. It is me, your host, Jackson, and joining me today is my host, Peter. An army of hosts. You're muted.
I'm muted. Okay. I need.
Peter's not allowed to talk on stream.
I mean, I've been doing. I've been screwing up on the last three shows, so I might be
It's
getting
okay.
old instead. But
It's all right. It's all good. And we also have Nestlig, who is one of the editors of my scripts. We love Nestlig here.
Good to be
He's
back,
great.
and now in full profile this time.
now he's in
Yes.
widescreen, not looking through a hole.
He's in widescreen. Hello, all in the side chat. We have Scott Duke and Jamie E. Welcome to the show. All right. Let's see. Last time we started a video with John Lennox, Michael Behe, and Stephen Meyer, where they were talking about how Darwinism has just become more difficult to defend because it's always Darwinism, right?
Yeah.
Or neo-Darwinism, one of those. It's never they don't ever just say, oh, the current instantiation of the theory of evolution, or something like that.
My hypothesis is that if they can call it Darwinism, they can pretend that science hasn't advanced since the 1850s. And another option is to call evolution a religion, which is kind of admitting that your position might not be as strong as you want it to be.
Yeah.
I always found that really funny.
Hey, if the opponents are religion, then we can call ourselves a religion too, right? That's all that matters.
Yeah.
But also, we're not religion because we want to get it in the science classroom. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It's all very confusing.
I think that is the goal. If you can pretend that evolution is a religion, then you can have your religion, aka creationism, especially young Earth creationism, taught in schools as well, which is ridiculous. Yeah. I'm still today. I should have brought cake because apparently it's my anniversary, according to Twitter, who said that it's my anniversary. I joined 4 years ago. So it's amazing that 2015 is only 4 years ago. Oh, wait, no, I got suspended several times. So I had to make new accounts. But
yeah, I was like, that doesn't sound right.
I managed to behave. So I am tolerated for 4 years now, which is kind of a good anniversary, I think. I mean, people who know we will confirm.
Yeah. And Anonymous Pie Waves. And Ian Debunked. Hello, welcome.
And we have RJ.
Yes, you are correct.
Hey, RJ.
Yeah, I said it's RJ.
Yeah.
Yeah, Darwin was wrong. Evolution is fake. Yeah, they do that a lot. It's kind of sad. All right, we ready to?
I have one question before we start. Did you see that Erica debated ending for trouble?
I did see
part of it. An impromptu debate.
Yes.
Yeah, I saw part of it.
I listened to the whole thing while I was working on something else, and I was like, just like a whole time laughing, silently listening, just taking everything in. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys
it's hitting every beat.
I don't know if you guys are following. I just found out about a channel recently called Zach B. Hancock. If you aren't following him, you definitely should. He's another really cool evolution and creationism debunking channel. So if you're not following him, definitely do that. Go check out his channel. So, all right. Oh, I do want to say, one person told me that they are watching this series with interest because a relative of theirs is a big fan of Lennox and thinks that he's, a super smart guy and all that. And so, I mean, he's a mathematician, so I'm sure he can do math very well. But as for like, can he do biology? Doesn't really seem like it. So,
I don't know. Hey, we've got another famous person in chat, McKinnon Mitchell.
Hello, welcome to the show.
He says he's actually on time for once, and I'm immediately going to shill for him because McKinnon Mitchell is working on a documentary about Mr. Greg Locke.
Oh.
So I cannot wait until that comes out. For those who have seen The Weakness of Kent Hovind, that was another documentary that he made.
Relating to Greg Locke, are you guys aware that he made a movie which is out in theaters now?
I've heard about it, but I haven't seen anything.
I actually saw an ad for it when I went to the movies. The last thing that I went and saw in theaters, there was an ad for it. And I was like, oh my God, not him. And I had to explain to the person I was there with who it was.
Is it the God's Not Dead movie guy or something? Or
no, it's like, I can't remember the name of it, but he made, it's like Jesus Uprising or something like that. But yeah, so he just made a video or a whole movie or something, which is in theaters now. And the person I was there watching the movie with was like, I don't know who that is, and I had to explain. I was like, oh yeah, this guy is like tried to get his wife put in a mental hospital after cheating on her and all this other fun stuff.
Yeah. So. and he's holding a church in a circus tent, so apparently he's the only clown there.
Jesus Revolution, Jamie E. on the ball as always. Jesus Revolution.
Jesus Revolution.
Yep.
Now I'm
Jesus
imagining.
Will come back and fight a revolution.
Yeah. Now I'm imagining Jesus coming back with an AK-47. Too bad he won't have tanks because God is afraid of iron chariots. So.
Very true. Can't
I mean,
have that.
Revolution is probably going to be beaten down very quickly.
I think there was like a joke on Family Guy about like Jesus having like an AK and like fighting I think it was the Romans or something like that. So you never know. Locke would be funny if he wasn't so scary. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Very true. All right. Well, let's jump right into it. So we started this video last time. We got the very first like few minutes of it, so now we are actually full diving into it.
Yeah. Oh, goody.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see what happens.
As I've got it, the record shows one abrupt meaning a few million years, but in the geologic time, that's the blink of an eye, one abrupt event after another. Photosynthesis, just all of a sudden it's there. The Avalon explosion, the great Ordovician biodiversification event, whatever that may have been, the Silurian Devonian terrestrial explosion.
Okay.
Fish appear, birds appear.
Wait, hold on.
Dinosaurs.
Hold on. I'm sorry I have to pause so soon, but he said Silurian to Devonian? That's two periods over going over like tens of millions of years.
So basically, whenever something new appears, it's an explosion. Basically everything is an explosion now.
I do want to point out so he mentioned photosynthesis first. So photosynthesis was invented by microbes. Mm-hmm. So things that have very short generation times and have very, very large populations. So I'm not at all surprised that it took microbes, maybe like less than a couple million years to come up with photosynthesis. I don't know. That doesn't really surprise me. The Avalon again. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just saying that the exact timing of photosynthesis, or maybe oxygenic photosynthesis in specifically, is not very well done. Like you can say like, oh, this is the time when oxygen became prevalent. So by this time it had to have occurred, but we don't know exactly when
Right.
exactly it appeared for the first time. And also there are other forms of photosynthesis that does not produce oxygen as well. So yeah.
Right. Yeah, that like use like elemental sulfur as their electron acceptor, things like that. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Actually, and there's a good book.
Donor. I think you meant the donor.
Sorry, it's the electron donor. Yes, correct. And there's a good book. What is it? The New History of Life. Jamie E. I forget who wrote that book. It's A New History of Life by oh man, I forget their names. But one of the cool things that they talk about in that book is how the origin, how like, so, you know, we see that oxygenic photosynthesis was around because we see this, you know, increase in oxygen in both the oceans and then later the atmosphere. And that's, you know, signified in part by things like these banded iron formations. There's no more like uraninite and pyrite being produced, you know, stuff like that, because the conditions are no longer anoxic.
Yeah.
Right.
Also, oxygenic photosynthesis could have evolved long before these signs of it, because those signs are already happening when oxygen gets to a degree, to a certain threshold when these things happen. So yeah, it's very difficult to calibrate these things, especially when you talk about as simple as microbes. Like you can look at the fossils themselves of microbes to see whether they are photosynthetic or not. They cannot really tell, even if you have those fossils.
Oh, Kirschvink and Ward. Yes. Yeah. That's right. Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, you're right. So we don't know the upper bound. We know the lower bound for the evolution of oxygenic photosynthesis. We don't know the upper bound. And so for them to claim it just happened, like, no, you don't know that. We don't know that. We have no idea when it arose. So yeah. Interestingly, the right before those like banded iron formations and stuff, you start seeing like oxidized like manganese. So you see that like these precursor systems were in place before full-fledged oxygenic photosynthesis arose, which I think is kind of cool in the fossil record.
This is like a paper, or I think maybe a few years old, where they like in oxygenic, like you have many systems of photosynthesis, and one of the major difference between the photosynthesis systems that don't produce oxygen and those that do is that the ones that do have a special metal cluster called the oxygen evolving complex, which is made of manganese. And the question is, how did this particular cluster came about? And one interesting hypothesis is that basically the manganese itself was the first electron donor. Before water became the electron donor, and then when water becomes the electron donor, then you produce oxygen. Basically, when you take away the electrons from water, the hydrogen escapes, and then what is left is the O2 of the molecule. But in this experiment to test this hypothesis, they removed the metal cluster from this photosynthesis system, and to see what will happen. Like it's no longer able to take away electrons from water molecules, but it is able to take away electrons from manganese. So yeah, it supports the hypothesis that the precursor was able to take electrons from manganese. And it's also interesting. Like one last thing to note is that the way that the manganese complex in photosynthesis is built is by taking away electrons one by one, basically. Like that's how the complex is built, by taking manganese and then taking away the electrons from that. So it's interesting how the process is basically recapitulated in this system.
That's pretty cool. I didn't know that. That is really neat. I like that. But
I think I may, if I have the time, I may have want to do a whole video on how photosynthesis evolves. I actually did a talk on Vandalia 1998. I think. 98, yes. Vandalia 1998, and I did the full talk on photosynthesis, although that talk was way too long, over 3 hours. So I think I did a bit too much on that. But maybe I will do a video or a series of videos if I have the time to do that.
Yeah, absolutely, because that is really cool. Yeah.
And Jackson,
so yeah, suffice it to say, it's by no means like an irreducibly complex structure. What were we saying, Peter?
Yeah, you got a request.
Regarding
making of a video. Jackson Wheat, intellectual iconoclasm, says Jackson Wheat.
Jesus Christ Vampire Hunter?
A live reaction to Jesus Christ Vampire Hunt. I mean,
I don't know what that is.
Is it a prequel to Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter?
I haven't heard of that. Or yeah, I don't know. I don't think I've heard of that movie, so I'll have to look that up. I say in trepidation. I don't know. All right, well, I'll definitely look into that.
I'm imagining Jesus with a lightsaber on the back of a dinosaur chasing vampires. Yeah. I think that's probably it.
That sounds about right.
It sounds like the level of Sharknado, stuff like that.
Yeah, or Velocipaster.
Oh, yes.
Something like that.
Yes. Okay. Continue.
The other... he mentioned the Avalon explosion, which was where you see a bunch of what are now evidently... So you get these, or what are now evidently considered like stem eumetazoans. So the first eukaryotes, according to molecular clocks, the last common ancestor of all eukaryotes lived somewhere between like 1.5 and 2 billion years ago. So around that time was when you had the last common ancestor of all eukaryotes. Then about 800 million years ago or so, you have like when molecular clocks estimate that the last common ancestor of all animals lived somewhere around 800 million years ago. And then about 635 million years ago, you have the start of the Ediacaran, and you start getting these macroscopic fossils of organisms, right? You're not just getting like little tiny algae and acritarchs and microbes and things like that. You're actually getting like body fossils, which you can see with the naked eye. And so the Avalon explosion was right at the start of the... Sorry, no, it wasn't. It wasn't right at the start. It was a little bit after the start, but it was pretty early on in the Ediacaran. And so you start getting these guys called like rangiomorphs, which look like these little fractal fronds. Look kind of like fern fronds, but not really. And they have this very interesting fractal pattern. And so there was a lot of debate since they first started finding these in the 1960s of like, are they animals? Are they plants? Are they independently multicellular, protists or something? What are they? Well, recently, as researchers have continued finding like different stages of their ontogeny and various very well preserved body fossils, it turns out they're actually stem eumetazoans, or that's what it seems like right now. So basically, you have sponges, which are the most basally derived living animals. And then everything more complex than a sponge is a eumetazoan. It has true tissues. So Charnia and its rangiomorph relatives are just slightly more derived than sponges, but not by much.
Yeah. I think one significant traits they have, which aligns them to the other animals, is they have a consistent body plan. Yes.
Right. They have a regular
and like sponges have like an irregular body plan, and also many like plants and fungi. They vary often in their morphology. Whenever they have morphology at all, but in bilaterians and also jellyfish, their body plan is very consistent.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so there's not a whole lot that aligns them with the animals, but they have this regular body plan, unlike plants, fungi, and basically anything else we're aware of. So any other eukaryotes we're aware of. So yeah, they seem to be very, very primitive animals, which makes sense because given molecular clocks, we expect that the first animals appeared around 800 million years ago, and in fact, there are fossils of sponges dating back to like 650 million years ago. That's rocks from Oman, and there's a whole back and forth on whether these sterane molecules actually belong to sponges or not, and the evidence seems to weigh in favor of sponges over, some sort of geological process or an algae or something like that. I have read a bunch of these papers because I read the first one, and then I saw that there were a bunch of back and forths, and then there was a paper that came out that sort of summarized like all the evidence for like sponges in the Precambrian. Although that paper, which was by Antcliffe and Brazier, 2014, made a mistake. They made a mistake, and that was they cited a paper which had done a genetic analysis of these bacteria that live in a symbiotic relationship with sponges called Poribacter. And it seemed that Poribacter had the genes capable of making those steranes. Turns out it was an error. There was a sequence error, and they don't actually have it. But the paper, Antcliffe and Brazier 2014, cited that earlier paper, and so then the paper that fixed their genetic analysis, they retracted that. So it turned out no, Poribacter doesn't have it. The algae that were implicated, they're called pelagophytes, they don't produce these steranes in large enough quantities because sponges produce them at the end of a metabolic process. They intentionally produce them. They are made by these algae as a byproduct. Like every so often, and one of these steranes is made by accident. So, and we know the quantity that is produced by these pelagophyte algae versus by sponges, right? And it much more matches sponges in the fossil record than the algae. Well, some other researchers said, well, maybe it's these other protists that make the precursors of these products, and then maybe there's some geological process that configures them into these steranes. Again, it doesn't generate, or these protists and the geological processes don't generate these steranes in enough quantity to match what we actually see in the fossil record. So it's way, way higher in the fossil record than what we should expect for geological processes, the algae, or the protists. So the evidence seems pretty good for the sponges, at least for now. It could be that there's some unknown process that does actually generate them that we're just not aware of yet. That's possible. But right now, it seems to be evidence in favor of sponges. So there's all that. So there's that evidence. And so the earliest evidence of animals we have is sponges. Big shock. And then a little bit later into the Ediacaran, because that was in the Cryogenian. So a little bit later, we find the first eumetazoans, like the Rangiomorphs. And then shortly thereafter that, we find the first stem bilaterians. Right? We find Dickinsonia, the Proarticulata. We find Kimberella and Icaria. All these guys that are really early bilaterians. And then you find a bunch of crown bilaterians in the next period, the Cambrian. So it seems, for all intents and purposes, like an evolutionary sequence, if you ask me.
And I've also recently seen a talk. I can link the YouTube recording of that in a moment. But it was like one researcher who discusses their findings about the community, basically the nature of the communities in the Avalon versus the White Sea versus the Nama, and it seems that the earlier ones, the community is structured randomly. Basically, it's the community is not you don't see any differences in location from one to the other. So it's basically the way the community is structured is mostly dominated by reproduction. Like one animal happens to be here because the reproduction of I can't recall every detail, but basically in the later phase
to the current and it landed wherever.
It lands over there, and then the pattern is basically dominated by the specific mode of reproduction these early creatures had. So, but in later phases, what they see is the community becomes more structured. So you see for the first reef builders in one location that is more in more shallow environments, and you see a different community elsewhere in deeper parts of the ocean. So that's very interesting to see how
that is really interesting.
Yeah, how that happens. I will find it and I will link the
definitely
the talk here.
That's pretty cool. But yeah, it seems for all intents and purposes like we have an evolutionary sequence. And so when I co-wrote the Steve Meyer script for Professor Dave, we harped on that. We were like, here's this whole sequence. You know, it's not perfect by any means, but you see you see sponges before the first stemumetazoans, before the first bilaterians, before the first crown bilaterians, which is exactly what we expect on evolution, right? And it didn't take a couple million years, which even still, let's pause. Just the idea that like something happens in a couple million years, therefore design, that's insane. That is a stupid argument, right? Like I don't even know I don't know how to be generous about that. Like that is a dumb argument. If it took just a couple million years, therefore it must have been designed. How do they like say that with a straight face? I don't even know.
Whatever they view as evidence against evolution, it's automatically favors design by default. Yeah, it's that.
You're right. It is. He mentioned the Ordovician radiation, the Gobi, the Great Ordovician Biodiversification Event. So we talked about that in a video we did a long time ago on the Cambrian explosion. The interesting thing about, and then of course I redid some of that for the Professor Dave video. The interesting thing about that is the Cambrian explosion is an explosion in disparity. So you have these differences between clades, right? The different phyla arise in the Cambrian, or a bunch of them, not all of them, but a bunch of them arise in the Cambrian. And so you see them shooting off in different evolutionary trajectories, right? Whereas for the Ordovician event, you see diversity. So within these clades that have now shot off in different directions, you see this radiation. You see it within those clades. And so it's really weird that Meyer tries to like recruit this as an argument in his favor, not least because the Gobi lasted like tens of millions of years, starting in the late Cambrian and then progressing through the Ordovician. So it was tens of millions of years, involving mostly invertebrates, most of whom were small. And then what else? So he mentioned like the Silurian, Devonian, and fish, and I don't even know what that's a reference to. I guess the origin of tetrapods, which again took tens of millions of years. It didn't just happen even within like a couple million years. So, anyway, all right, we can keep going.
Yeah.
Well, so for next week, Jackson, you should run a poll, because Neslick just put a link in the description. Here's the presentation on the community evolution of the Ediacaran, and then a link to
that's the one I referenced earlier.
Yeah, to the YouTube video. But Savage Cobra kind of official made me lose complete everything that you were talking about, because he said the movie, the Jesus Christ Vampire Hunter, is Jesus uses kung fu to wipe out a horde of bloodsuckers who attack lesbians. And then Jamie E was kind enough to say it's on YouTube full length and put a link in there.
Oh no.
So I'm curious next week who went to the Jesus Christ Vampire Hunter first and who went to Neslick's video first. Good. That's some stiff competition. Okay, let's continue.
Appear. Mammals appear. Okay, so the obvious objection.
Okay, let's talk about that one.
Digging.
Let's talk about that one for a minute. So Meyer made a little bit of a goof he got interviewed on backstory. Meyer got interviewed on the Discovery Institute's channel, their normal channel where they put out videos, and he did an interview. So they like put up a question, it's like, how has Darwinism been falsified or something like that, and then whoever spends like 5 minutes talking about that prompt, then they go into the next one. So Meyer is asked about the supposed rapid radiations that just happen in a geological instant of a few million years. And he accidentally says that mammals appeared in the Eocene epoch, which, for reference, lasted from 56 to 34 million years ago. Now, if you know anything, literally anything about paleontology, you will know that that's wrong. Mammals, crowned mammals are known from like 160 million years ago in the late Jurassic, like Jeremiah. So he made a little bit of a goof, little oopsie, just a little one. And we pointed that out in that video. We laughed about it. And then Gunter Beckley wrote a defense of Meyer saying, oh, well, he meant to say crown mammal orders, which isn't true either, because there are members of crown mammal clades in the Paleocene also. So that didn't work. There are crown eutherians in the Paleocene. So yeah, that didn't quite work. They're like crown primates in the Paleocene, right? So, whatever. But so suffice to say, mammals did not appear in the Eocene. Mammals, the ancestors of mammals, even the like mammal-like reptiles, the more reptilian synapsids, go back like 320 million years ago. And we have this progression from the pelycosaurs, which are these more sort of reptile grade synapsids, like Dimetrodon, Edaphosaurus, Varanosaurus, all those guys. Or Varanops. Ophiacodon, it's another one. So these more reptilian guys in sort of the late Carboniferous to the early Permian. Then by the mid-Permian, a bunch of them they predominantly get replaced by therapsids, which are a bit more mammalian, not super mammal-like yet, but they're on the way. And then they get, most of them die off in the Permian Triassic mass extinction event, leaving just a couple clades, cynodonts, dicynodonts, and therocephalians, or a handful. And then therocephalians don't survive the Triassic, dicynodonts don't survive the Triassic, so all that's left is the cynodonts and the stem mammals. And so you have like the origin of mammals somewhere around 180 or so million years ago, so early Jurassic. And then you get lots and lots of little stem mammal fossils, in the Triassic and also in the Jurassic, and then eventually you have the crown mammals. So it's totally wrong, just completely, totally wrong. I don't even know what to say. I mean, it's sad almost. Like if you went through a biology,
it was recorded, right? Like they could have removed.
Yes, that part from the video. They could have removed it. They put it in their own video, which means they like didn't know that it was wrong. Meyer didn't say anything like, "Oh, I misspoke" or something like that. They didn't realize it. He's just that clueless.
The guys who were editing the video were like, "Oh, he knows what he's talking about. He's a a philosopher, so he knows what he's talking about fossil fossil record."
Yeah, it was so bad, and the and Beckley trying to be like, oh well, he meant crown eutherians. Like, no, that doesn't work either. Saying, oh, he meant crown eutherian orders, that doesn't work either, because there were crown primates in the Paleocene. So it doesn't work. Whatever way you try to salvage it, it just doesn't work, and it's really funny. And yes, R.J. Downard one of the guys watching right now is an author on a really good book about the reptile mammal transition. It is called Evolution Slam Dunk. If you haven't bought it, do so. I also shielded in my video the lava lizard's tail because we talked about the whole reptile mammal transition. So if you want to know about that, read his book, watch the video, do all that fun stuff. Do you guys want to add anything?
Oh yeah, but also like even if he meant to say a crown group, how circular is it? Like, oh, a crown group appeared. This is how your crown group is defined. Like it's the first appearance. It's the last common ancestor of a particular group. So there's always a time when it first appeared by definition. So it's not remarkable by any stretch if he meant by that. So yeah, it's
it's still wrong because they were crown eutherians even.
But I'm just saying that there's another layer to how wrong the argument is. That's all I'm saying. Yeah.
It's fractally wrong. It's just layers and layers of wrong. All right, we can keep going.
Since about Darwin's time, the Earth is big. Geologic time is essentially endless. There are fossils there. We just haven't found the intermediate forms.
Right. That's an objection to the claims about fossil discontinuity that's known as the artifact hypothesis. The idea is
that's not what that is.
The missing ancestral forms are an artifact either of incomplete sampling or incomplete preservation.
Right.
The Cambrian explosion itself presents a very nice test of that artifact hypothesis. The claim with respect to sampling is that we haven't looked long enough. Well, we're 160 years on now from the Cambrian, or from the publication of The Origin of Species. And the Cambrian explosion, from our point of view, has become even more explosive. There are more new forms of life, more new animal forms known now in that Cambrian explosion event than there were in Darwin's time. And yet, with that passage of time, we've found no more of the intermediate. So there are more new forms still, all of which are still lacking intermediate forms.
Instead of our findings regressing to some sort.
Okay, so I'm not going to go over the Cambrian again because we've done that ad nauseum, and he's just stupid and wrong about everything he says. What I'm going to say is the artifact hypothesis, he's partially right about the artifact hypothesis. He's not technically wrong with what he says about the artifact hypothesis. He's leaving stuff out. He's lying by omission, basically. So yes, the artifact hypothesis does say that there will be problems with preservation due, either to like poor sampling. There are times when you have non-deposition, right? So you're just not going to have fossils in that region because you don't have sediment in that area. But what he critically leaves out, is that some organisms are more likely to be fossilized than others. And he pretends in his book that that's not an issue because he says, what's the thing? He points to cyanobacteria fossils in the Precambrian. And he says, so we have these cyanobacterial fossils. Therefore, anything can get fossilized, I guess. And it's no, that's not how taphonomy works. I mean, think for a moment. How many places in the fossil record do we have really nice samples of cyanobacteria? Not very many, I would be willing to venture a guess. It's a lot harder to find cyanobacteria than it is plant leaves or diatoms or something like that. Things that have this tough, they're larger and they have this tough cell wall, right? But he just kind of pretends it's not real. And if you look at the Cambrian, the places where we have our major fossil deposits are all Lagerstätten. They're exceptionally preserved deposits because they have to be. No one's finding Cambrian fossils in very poor depositional environments because these organisms just wouldn't survive it. They wouldn't make it. Their fossils would have been destroyed. Unlike maybe a T-Rex or something like that. But Meyer just kind of pretends it doesn't matter, and yet it does. And we do have fossils of Precambrian organisms predating, the Cambrian, which are related to Cambrian organisms. And so again, it's just wrong. But anyway, Not gonna delve into all that again. We've already done it, so we'll keep going.
Can I point out the dumbest thing that I've ever heard someone say is, according to the Darwinian theory, I think he said, geologic time is basically endless.
Yeah, I don't think that was ever. I don't think anyone ever thought the Earth was eternal. Like the universe is one thing, but I don't think anybody ever thought the Earth was eternal.
No,
at least not from like Darwin's day. Nobody in Darwin's day thought the Earth was eternal. So
no.
yeah, I don't know where he's getting that.
It's a remark that I've never heard before. It's just weird.
I don't think I have either.
Okay, let's see if there's more.
Darwinian mean. They're departing from Darwin more and more and more.
Right.
Quickly, one last notion here, one last question on this before I turn to my big problem in life, maths, with John Lennox.
Is he going to actually talk about math?
Punctuated equilibrium. Stephen Jay Gould, and by all accounts, great. He seems to have been a dynamic teacher. He was certainly prolific. The great biologist Stephen Jay Gould, who held, well, you tell me what punctuated equilibrium held and why it doesn't answer the problem.
Pause for a moment.
Yep.
Shoot. If he's going to say hopeful monster, I will face palm.
You're like, I quit.
I quit. All right.
Let's let him run through the whole thing and then we'll pick it apart.
Yeah. I was so hoping that he would misspeak and say my biggest problem in life, John Lennox, but we didn't get it. Too bad.
New idea. Gould and another paleontologist, Niles Eldredge, formulated this theory in the late 1970s. And what they were trying to do is describe the fossil record more accurately. And what they saw, and what paleontologists saw then and see now even more distinctly, is this pattern of abrupt appearance and what they called stasis, that the basic form of an animal, the basic body plan, will remain constant through long periods of time, either going extinct or continuing to the present day. There would be variation within the constraints of a body plan, but limited variation.
The crocodile appears
and remains.
All right.
And so what they suggested was that there are these punctuation events where you have this sudden appearance and then this long period of equilibrium, of stasis. But they wanted to maintain
that evolution takes place in fits and starts.
Exactly. Evolution takes place in fits and starts. Right. And so it was a wonderful improvement in our description of the fossil record. But the problem was that Gould and Eldredge never came up with a mechanism that convinced their colleagues in evolutionary biology that evolution could occur so quickly. There was no, it was a good description of the fossil record without a mechanism to explain how that amount of change could occur in those short bursts of time.
The meteor smacks the earth.
So pause.
Wipes out.
All right, so let's pause. Okay, because he's just, again, he's leaving out critical details, and he's just lying also. When he says there's no mechanism, he's just lying about that. Gould and Eldredge were very firm adherents of natural selection, right? Mm-hmm. So, no, he's just lying. Okay, so first we need to kind of explain what punctuated equilibrium actually entails, because he's most of the way there, but he's leaving out some parts. So you have a population, which is in an area. You have this one big population. Then you have a little satellite population, which goes off typically allopatrically. So they're being in a different geographic area.
Let's say a group of finches on South America, and then there was a few individuals flew off towards a few islands somewhere.
Right. Let's say hypothetically that happened. Yeah, something like that happened. So you have this smaller population which goes off somewhere else, and they undergo new selective pressures as a result of their new environment. So natural selection is still playing a traditional role in punctuated equilibrium and sexual selection and genetic drift and all the others. They're all playing very traditional roles. But also, when you have that satellite population, let's say they do well in their environment and they start reproducing and they return and become sympatric again with the parental population, now it looks like in the fossil record, a new population just came out of nowhere, right? Like it looks like, so you have same population, same, oh, now something's different. And it's like in one horizon, you know, suddenly something new happened. It looks like that. But what Gould and Eldridge are actually suggesting is this population, let's see if I can do it. This population actually went somewhere else and then came back, right? So while these populations are evolving at the same time, this one actually left and then came back. And what's interesting, there was actually a recent study which showed this, is populations that are sympatric, it tested whether populations that are sympatric developed their differences either allopatrically or when they came back together secondarily in sympatry. Did they become ecologically differentiated while they were apart or when they came back together? And it turns out the answer is when they came back together, which is exactly what Gould and Eldridge had argued way back in the 70s and 80s. So now we have this with even more data today. But again, it's just natural selection and sexual selection and the normal mechanisms. There's nothing weird or unusual about it. And in fact, the criticism, one of the major criticisms, or some of the major criticisms of Gould and Eldridge wasn't even really a punctuated equilibrium itself. It was that they kind of overhyped their own theory. They were comparing themselves to like, you know, macromutation, you know, the saltationist theories and all this sort of stuff. But they explicitly said we're not proposing saltationism, right? They're not proposing hopeful monsters. They didn't. In fact, they argued explicitly against that. There were also some other ideas that they sort of tagged along with punctuated equilibrium, like what is it, like a species selection. So they had like Wright's rule, which is that there's this concept which they called Wright's rule, and it's basically that speciation is stochastic with respect to selective pressures. So basically, we'll say you have a trend sort of in one direction, but every so often you might have a speciation event which causes one population becomes allopatric, and then they, undergo a different set of selective pressures. But regardless of the overall trend, or most of the species that are resulting from this overall trend, some of them may reverse the trend. Like if there's a trend for most of these animals for these species to get larger over time, every so often you're going to have like a population which becomes smaller as a result of adapting to local selective pressures. So that's Wright's rule. So Gould and Eldridge were like, yeah, species selection is part of our idea. It's part of punctuated equilibrium. Certain species or certain traits, species with certain traits are more likely to be selected over species that lack certain traits. So Dawkins in The Blind Watchmaker is like, he basically says, I really don't have a problem with punctuated equilibrium. And in fact, Gould and Eldridge, what they're doing, kind of as Meyer said, is they're actually kind of helping make the fossil record more understandable. So it's not that you have stasis and then suddenly gradual change. It's actually that you have stasis but somewhere else, and it only appears gradual, right? Or sorry, it only appears very rapid. So you have gradual change elsewhere, but it appears very rapid if you're looking at it in just one locality. If you're just going in one like fossil core, for instance, in this one place. And so they were actually trying to help sort of deal with this issue. But again, that's kind of lost on Meyer and others who are just trying to use Gould and Eldridge as like a cudgel against normal evolutionary theory.
Yeah. So. Also, if I understood correctly, that the PE had nothing to do with the body plans. It only concerns species level divergences. Yeah,
right. It was there was a quote which Gingrich made a big deal about back in the 80s, which was punctuated equilibrium is only deployed at the species level. It's only deployed at the species level. So it's not about populational level changes, like some genetic polymorphism within a population, and it's not about multi-species trends. It's literally only about speciation events.
Mm-hmm. Also,
So,
we appear to have a very different discussion going on in the live chat about the A bomb. Apparently.
What?
Yeah, I don't know why, but yeah.
I don't know.
All right.
Yeah,
Also, we had one.
We have an apologist in the side chat who claims that the atom bomb did more damage than any creationist ever could. I beg to differ when I look at what is going on in the world, and who are the creationists. I think they caused more wars and more killing than the atom bomb ever did. But
I don't know.
It's a weird
so Jamie
thing.
E, you say that's the first time you've heard that aspect of punctuated equilibrium directly explained. Did it make sense? Did I make sense when I said that, or was I just making it more complicated? I'm curious.
For me, it made sense. But one thing I also want to mention is like we had one called Jeremy in the live chat. Is it the same Jeremy as the one you talked to?
In the live chat?
It's now a bit up, now a bit further up. Jeremy, the orange.
Oh, it just says Jeremy. Oh,
yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if that's him.
All right.
Could be. So anyway, you guys have anything you want to add, or are we ready to keep going?
No,
I think we are ready to go further.
No, I want to say to the life apologist, if you want to have someone add up your numbers, go ask John Lennox. He seems to be good at it. So let's continue.
About the dinosaurs and creates
an ecological niche.
Yes, it creates space for new species to emerge, and so suddenly they do.
Well,
you find that unpersuasive. These two are chuckling.
The problem is you have to build the animal, and this is the second part of the. When I wrote in the book at Darwin's Doubt, I talked about two big mysteries. One is the mystery of the missing fossils, but the second is the mystery of how the evolutionary process generates the new biological form. Because what we know now, as in our computer world, if you want to generate a new form of life, you have to have a lot of new information. In the computer world, want to get a new program, got to have new code. Same thing is true in life. Where's the code come from? Just opening up the niche doesn't explain the origin of the information necessary to build the new animal form to fill it.
All right. Now we come to maths, the mathematical problem. Maths was always my weakest subject, and I am extremely conscious that I'm speaking to the emeritus professor of mathematics at Oxford University. All right. So let me just put in layman's terms, as best I can, and I have worked on it, what I take to be the mathematical problem that has emerged in recent decades with Darwin. We know now something about when life seems to have emerged, something between 4 and 5 billion years ago. We now know quite a lot about the rate at which random genetic mutations take place. Darwin's theory suggests that evolution arises because random genetic mutations take place and natural selection acts on them. We also know quite a lot about how complicated it is to create proteins that function, proteins, chains of amino acids, a couple of hundred and longer, and the math simply doesn't work. From the beginning of time to the present, there is some number of mutations that had to have taken place to create the life that we see around us, and it just doesn't add up. Is that right, roughly?
Oh, it's much worse than that. Because I think one of the very important things, and I'm not a biologist, but I do study the biologists as carefully as I can, is that Darwin's theory, whatever it does or doesn't do, says zero about the origin of life. He didn't claim to speak about the origin of life.
He always presumes that the preexistence of a form from which other forms evolve.
Okay. But unfortunately, for many years.
So, for the people in chat, we have lost Jackson for the moment. Apparently his internet cut out, so he's trying to come back. So I'll just take the opportunity to say, I'm already calling bullshit. For a man who has studied the biologists very carefully, and then saying that Darwin didn't say anything about the origin of life, then you haven't studied at all. Because if you're talking about Darwin, Darwin came up with the theory of evolution, which has absolutely nothing to do with the origin of life. And this is probably his go-to thing, because he has no clue what he's talking about. I won't say that I have a lot of a clue what I'm talking about, but he has no clue what he's talking about. And he's just, from the get-go, being dishonest. And yeah, James Downard, off they go, origins or bust. It's always the same thing. It is incredibly stupid. I wish they would finally evolve to the point where they can actually be honest for once. I mean, this is just stupid. Anything to add, Leslie?
Not yet. Like I would like to hear more before I step in, or maybe I don't know. Do we wait before Jackson comes back, or?
Jackson said he's trying to come back. He says they unplugged it downstairs for some unknown reason. So we may have to juggle it a bit.
It won't take long. It probably won't take long before he gets back then. So, but in the meantime, I can perhaps get a paper that I think is relevant to this point, like it's about the first protein, or at least first polypeptide in the transition from the polypeptide to proteins, which doesn't take, like, they assume that the first functional polypeptide has to be like at least 100 amino acids long and very specific sequence of amino acids, but that is pretty naive. Like probably the first polypeptides were very short, and with a very reduced amino acid alphabet even. Also, which means that the functional units were much more easily to be found, even if you assume a random process. But then I will link for those who are interested in the chat.
Yeah, shall we let him ramble on a little while Jackson tries to rejoin?
Because I don't know if Jackson doesn't want to miss anything. I don't know about that. Like maybe he will come back and he asks you, "Oh, can you rewind a bit?" And then you have to rewind. That's probably, I don't know. If this is a problem.
We also can't have a lot of dead air.
It's also true, yeah.
So I think he's probably not going to have a lot of things that need to be responded to, going off of his first words, but we can see what he has to say. I think if we keep it flowing, that's a little bit more interesting for the people in the chat than just rambling on completely irrelevant things. So let's hear what he has to say.
Richard Dawkins obscured everything, obfuscated the whole situation.
Dawkins, the Oxford biologist.
That's right, because he said that natural selection, which Darwin discovered, and he describes it as a blind automatic process, is responsible for the existence and variation of all of life. Now, he later admitted it took far too long to do.
Wrong. What? He describes it as the origin for existence? Never mind.
That evolution in the Darwinian sense cannot be responsible for the origin of life, for the simple reason is that evolution, whatever it does or doesn't do, presupposes the existence of life.
Right.
So you have two separate problems here. One is the origin of life, which
we'll
goes
come
back
to that one, I promise.
Okay,
we'll come to that
goes back to the origin of information, as Stephen has mentioned. But the second is just the sheer calculation. Now, you mentioned things in your questioning that have to do with the origin of life, proteins and so on. And one of my examiners at Cambridge was Sir Fred Hoyle. And he came to Cardiff where I was
not Fred
many years ago.
Well, what you missed is that our dear friend John Lennox just said that natural selection was responsible for the origin of life. Care to respond?
I mean, probably in part, probably.
I think you might go to chemistry being the origin of life, not necessarily
natural selection plays a role in chemistry. You can have selection on molecules, but Fred Hoyle is not the person to talk to about this, because as we've discussed before.
To be more specific, he said that the natural selection that Darwin came up with was responsible for the origin of life, which I kind of doubt.
Well, so I don't. I think he's probably got an inkling of an idea of what he's talking about. So there were probably protocells that operated with varying degrees of efficiency and varying degrees of symbiosis between the relevant parts. And so you would have had selection on those protocells for those that were more efficient and could function together as a more integrated whole. So sure, you had natural selection, but not on organisms. You had it on chemicals, right? On phospholipid membranes with RNA in them and ribosomes or something like that. Not on actual organisms. But Darwin had no idea about that. So, but yes, as RJ says, Fred Hoyle, bubonic plague from space guy, and anti-Big Bang. Yeah, Fred Hoyle was kind of nuts. Again, another mathematician, but he had some really wacky ideas about
Didn't he also claim that Archaeopteryx was a forgery?
Yep, a hoax. Yep, he claimed that. Yep, he thought that Archaeopteryx was a hoax. The whole octopus genes from space, that's his group. That's his. I
was thinking at that moment. Octopus. Yeah. Go ahead.
Fred Hoyle. I mean, the tornado in a junkyard analogy originated from him. The funny thing was, he did actually think abiogenesis happened. He just thought it happened in space and all the time. So, I don't know.
In all fairness, he could be right about that, but that we don't know.
That's true. He might be right, but the whole thing about viruses and genes dropping from space, I have doubts.
Yeah, me too.
Anyway. All right, we can keep going.
And he shocked everybody he just stood up and said to an absolutely packed crowd, because he was famous, he said life cannot have originated on Earth. And there was a collective gasp, and he said, I've done the calculations, and mathematically it is simply impossible. There isn't enough time.
He believed it happened in space.
And I actually have a copy of those calculations at home. And he just said it's quite obvious if you do the calculations.
So let's pause for a moment again. Let's pause for another moment. What the assumption is for those calculations is that you know all of the steps to go from inert inorganic molecules to protocells. The assumption, you can only make those calculations if you know all the steps. And you don't. No one does. So those calculations are meaningless. It's like when who was it? Was it Haldane suggested that there were a new trait arose every 300 generations or something like that, a new allele? It's there's no. That was an estimate that he made based on some very early data he had, but we now know that's not true. And in the case of the origin of life, we have no idea what the exact steps were. There are lots of different steps involving lots of different chemicals, but what the exact set of parameters that actually resulted in life, we don't know, and we'll probably never know. All we can do is generate different processes that build biomolecules. That's the most we can do. So
very simply and pregnantly, rabbits produce rabbits and very little else. And what his mathematics, I think, showed him was that the innocent aspect of evolution, which we can all accept, that is, you get minor variations on a theme, which Michael here has dealt with so successfully in his book, The Edge of Evolution. That's non-controversial. But once you go beyond that and think of new animals, new body plans, all of that kind of thing.
Darwin's book is The Origin of Species. It's not minor variations within species. It's the origin of species.
But once again, I do also want to point out that Dr. Dan Stern Cardinal had Michael Behe on, and Michael Behe could not define what the edge of evolution actually is. So go watch that talk. He even says in that talk, because Dan's like, okay, you wrote this whole book titled The Edge of Evolution. Where is the edge? And Behe could not give an answer. And they went back and forth over this for I think it was about an hour. And ultimately, you're left with no answers. Behe has no actual edge. There's no set of parameters he came up with that detail where evolution ends. He just didn't, because he can't, and he knows he can't, because he's a hack doing this for money. So anyway,
since you mentioned Dr. Dan, should we also point out that the most recent video he put out about Ken Ham is, I think, a must-watch for every atheist content creator, because Ken Ham apparently hired a very, very, very sketchy guy to produce a series of videos for AIG. That could have some ramifications over time, considering...
I honestly think it's more important for creationists to see that video.
That too, by the way.
Revolutionists. I think it's more important creationists watch that video to see who exactly is actually making mission statements for answers in Genesis right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's a guy who has called for violence against different groups of people, right? Yeah. Based on ideological differences. So is that who they want running their camp? It's not who I would want running my camp. That's for sure.
Oh, that's an individual that I would.
Who was that? I don't remember.
It's
a guy.
It's basically a neo-Nazi conspiracy theorist anti-vaxxer who's, as Jackson said,
the channel
pretty violent.
Do you know the channel In His Image?
Didn't he talk to Dapper?
Yeah, In His Image. The guy is that's his pseudonym, or one of his pseudonyms, his avatar, and then he has different pseudonyms he goes under, but he uses his actual name on Answers in Genesis.
Well, he uses two names, which is kind of weird.
Well,
don't mention his name then, because not toxic.
So, but at any rate, he copies word for word earlier blog posts that he wrote into Answers in Genesis articles. just word for word, the whole article, just copied and pasted. And so yeah. So if you haven't seen that video by Dan Stern Cardinal, go watch.
I've actually, a long time ago, when he made that video discussing feathers found on dinosaurs, I commented on his video, and then a day or so later, all the videos were taken down. And I don't know if he did that because of me, but I was really, really surprised by that. Like it it reminded me of also the same situation with standing for truth, and like I corrected something, and then the videos were taken down, and a new one was put up. Although he did not put up a new video. That's the difference. He just took them down.
Yeah. Oh, actually, Fish Head Salad makes a good point. Creationist apologist Chuck Missler proved that abiogenesis is impossible when he opened a jar of peanut butter on camera. Very true.
I remember that. Oh, it's an old one.
Yeah, an oldie but a goodie. You know,
it's like the snow bringing a snowball in Congress for this proves climate change. Yeah, it's the same level.
Amazing stuff.
Yeah.
All right. I guess we can keep going.
Cuts all this for me now is not what the mathematicians are saying, but what the mathematically conscious biologists are saying. Now, one of my friends in Oxford is a very distinguished.
I have to ask you, Jackson, what's a mathematically conscious biologist?
So I guess he means like population geneticists, but they are some of the most like ardent evolutionists you will meet because they actually do the math of how evolution works. Mm-hmm. I mean, let's remember, neo-Darwinism was founded by mathematicians, right?
Yeah.
Ronald Fisher, JBS Haldane, Sewell Wright were mathematicians who together founded a new theory of evolution by combining what we already had, natural selection, sexual selection, with particulate inheritance, so Mendelism, as well as the work of like Thomas Hunt Morgan in the 1910s and 20s. The idea that mathematicians are debunking evolution is insane. Like, they're the ones who basically formulated it. You know, it's bonkers.
Can I say one thing, NP Life apologist? If you keep posting things in chat about a specific virus that would probably get Jackson's video taken down, I will take you down and hide you from the chat. So cut it out.
Yep, we're not doing that.
No.
Not on this channel.
Okay.
All right.
Continue.
Yes.
Biologist, Professor Dennis Noble. And he has just made absolutely clear. He said,
"Oh no,
neo-Darwinism, that is the modern synthesis, that
standard textbook theory that we all learned
natural selection and mutation.
I knew it.
Doesn't need to be improved; it needs to be replaced."
First
and
of all,
he almost was quoting someone like Lynn Margulis, another very distinguished
hold on,
person.
let's pause
said
for a
it's
moment.
dead.
Oh my goodness, they are hitting all of the boxes. First of all, I want to answer Jeremy in the chat. It says Haldane's dilemma is still unsolved. Haldane himself admitted it wasn't a dilemma. Haldane himself admitted it wasn't a dilemma. He pointed out his math was wrong the first time he wrote it, and then when he redid the math, it wasn't a dilemma. Like, please, my goodness, do a little research. As for Dennis Noble is part of a group of guys who are pushing what's called the extended evolutionary synthesis.
Yeah, extended, right?
Which is not. So their idea is that the current instantiation of evolution, of the evolutionary theory, does not take seriously enough some ideas within biology. So, for instance, they're like, oh, they're not taking epigenetics seriously enough. They're not taking endosymbiosis seriously enough. And that's where you bring in Lynn Margulis, and we'll talk about her in a moment. Yeah. And kind of the response to that is, what do you consider serious? Like, all of these ideas are being folded into the modern version of evolution, regardless of what you want to call it. I wouldn't call it neo-Darwinism because it's way more advanced than that. But if you want to call it that, fine, I guess. It kind of loses all meaning. But typically I refer to just, the current model of evolution. Right?
Yeah,
like the current evolutionary synthesis.
At this point, we can just say like, oh, it's not an extended, it's an extending model, but that's continuously expanding. Yeah, it's continuously improving.
Yeah, it's right, exactly. new mechanisms are added, new things are learned, and they're all folded into the theory together. And so Dennis Noble is part of this group, and he's like, yeah, natural select. The idea that evolution is just natural selection and mutations, like, well, no, of course it isn't, and it hasn't been for decades. It's crazy to claim that evolution hasn't changed at all in like 80 or no, well, really 90 years. It's just crazy. Margulis is rightfully credited with pushing into symbiosis. She was really the first person, because there were some Soviets who had proposed sort of versions of it earlier, but not a whole lot of their stuff had made it into the West. But thanks to her, the idea of the chloroplasts and mitochondria being symbionts rather than derived organelles actually became mainstream, and she was right. And it only took, like, within the next decade, chloroplasts were accepted as endosymbionts. It took a couple more decades for I think it wasn't until like the late 80s or so that mitochondria also finally got accepted too, but because there's some oddities about them in the way that they do certain things. So anyway, but now we pretty much everybody accepts, except Fazal Rana apparently, that mitochondria is an endosymbiont. But at the same time, Margulis had some kind of odd ideas about how speciation happened. She seemed to think that speciation necessarily involved like symbioses, which it doesn't. It can, I guess, but it doesn't necessarily. And so, okay, I'll deal with that in a second.
You saw the same thing?
Yeah. Jeremy's putting like absolute inanity in the chat. I'll deal with it in a moment. But so Margulis kind of got sort of like what is it called, like what is it, like Nobel laureate disease or whatever, where like once people become like famous,
she was also very erratic before, even like that's also one reason why people didn't take her seriously. Like she had some wacky ideas that were not proven. Like only a few of her ideas were really important and were accepted, but the rest were And I thought, if I'm not mistaken, she also dabbled in HIV and 9/11 conspiracies and such.
Oh dear.
Yeah, so like I'm not full blown, but she was like on the edge of that, like maybe not, like something like that. It's, if I'm not mistaken, but she was a very interesting figure to say the least. Yeah.
So so Jeremy says it takes 84 million years to get just two letters lined up in an individual. I don't even know what that means. What do you mean by
I think he's referring to the Derwent Smith thing.
Are you saying, okay, so they
it takes two mutations for a beneficial effect, and you need to wait 80 million years for that or something. I think it's a Derwent Smith paper all over.
But wasn't it that it had to like deactivate and then reactivate the like a region? It was like a promoter or something, wasn't it? You had to have a mutation which deactivated it, and then how long for a promotion for another mutation to come in like reactivate it? Wasn't that the thing they were proposing?
I don't remember all of the details anymore. Like we did the whole video on that, responding to long story short, many years ago. But yeah.
The thing was, they point out in that paper that it doesn't actually take that long for a new promoter to arise, because if you assume, because the problem is, and it's the problem with all the waiting time problem arguments, is they always assume a target sequence and then say, how long does it take to get to X target sequence?
Yeah.
And that's just not how evolution works, because what they show in their paper is actually that a new promoter region appeared in like 600,000 years, something like that, right? Which is very much on, the human time scale. it didn't take 84 million years for this new promoter. It actually took just like 600,000 years. The problem is assuming a target sequence. So if you assume the target sequence, then sure, it might take a very long time to do it, but there's no reason why that target sequence is the only way to do something.
Yeah.
There's no reason to assume that. And people who make the waiting time problem arguments always make that error, among numerous others, which is why it's stupid. So, and why no one takes it seriously outside of creationists. All right, I guess we can continue.
Sure.
One more thing. We actually have someone in chat who thinks that tiny sparks created in the mud or plates of metals, which then help the life grow. That is what they claim.
Sure. The mud came alive.
Yeah.
That's how that happened.
I should quit drinking while watching YouTube videos. Apologies, because I'm beginning to think I want a glass of what he's having. But never mind. Let's continue.
Yep. Right.
So these are people who know about the calculations, who know about the complexity, and saying from that perspective, it's dead.
All right.
So
Fred Hoyle, we should add, was the very famous mid-last century astronomer.
Yes, that's
Correct.
right.
All right. Michael, problem 3 for this little layman. Cellular biology.
Actually, can we pause for a moment? Just a very quick note. He pointed out a very important fact. He said Fred Hoyle was an astronomer. Astronomer. We're talking about biology, right? Why are we talking about astronomers?
Because he's astronomically wrong.
It's not exactly just like Jeremy here. Because yes, the waiting time problem is not a problem. It's not real. That's why no one takes it seriously. It patently ignores that recombination happens. It assumes target sequences. What's another problem with it? It's just bad across the board. It is very bad math. Yeah. So I just want to point that out. All right, keep going.
Can you just tell us about irreducible? This is your sort of
thing.
Signal concept, irreducible complexity, and the story
Which again
of the
he couldn't
mousetrap.
defend.
Sure. Well, might be good to start by saying that Darwin and folks in his day didn't know much about the cell.
Right.
They had crummy microscopes. It looked like a little piece of jelly, and they knew nothing about molecules. And we now know that
Tiny and elementary also meant simple to them. So,
yes,
so biologically
that's
simple.
correct.
All
So
right.
like Jello or a jelly, they thought it might just bubble up from the sea. But modern science, in the past 70 or so years, has shown that the cell is run by molecular machines, real machines made of molecules, and really sophisticated ones. There are machines that act as propellers, machines that act as trucks to bring supplies from one side of the cell to the other side of the cell.
So when you magnify, these days we know enough about cells to know that they're not little blobs of Jello.
That's right.
You get inside a
They didn't believe
cell,
that in
you're looking
Darwin's
at a
day
city.
either.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that's right. It's got electrical apparatus, it's got vehicles, it's got information, it's got all sorts of things. And
Okay, let's
the
pause.
problem,
Let's pause for a
with you-
moment. Pay attention to the way that he's describing the cell. He said there's electricity, there are vehicles, there's information. Now, yes, there are electrical processes within the cell, within lots of your cells, right? That's how your neurons operate. You switch out, you have a swap between potassium and sodium ions in your nerves, and this generates an electrical potential. But that has nothing to do with intelligence of any sort. It is just the result of these ions moving across a membrane generates an electrical potential. It has nothing to do with intelligence or anything human-like at all. Same with vehicles. The vehicles he's referring to are vesicles. They are like little phospholipid membranes that carry things various materials from one part of the cell to another, right across like the cytoskeleton. Again, nothing like how humans create things. It's nothing like human vehicles.
It's also like they're obviously trying their best to hammer down the analogy of it's all machine like and such, and it's all very similar to designed objects. But as you said, like as you mentioned, if you look very closely to how these things actually operate, they don't operate very similar to machines that we have on our scale. Like the scale, like the nature of the forces that are at play at the scale of the cell is very different. Like most of the movement happens via random thermal fluctuations, and the way these vesicles move about is the energy from ATP, for example, is used to bias a Brownian motion into one particular direction. These machines are basically Brownian ratchets. They have been described as Brownian ratchets, which is very different from how machines operate.
It's a false dichotomy, because they compare things in the cells with obviously intelligently designed man-made things. And the last one that he mentioned, information, if you want to make a comparison to anything else, which is what they do, and say it's information like computer information. No, it is data, computer data, and the mechanism that works on this data is chemistry. So if you want to make an honest comparison, there's no information, there's data. But
oh look, Jeremy cited a young Earth creationist in argue of young Earth creationism. Wow, what a surprise. Who would have guessed it? Boring.
Okay, continue.
It's Sanford. Sanford is such a hack. Yeah, we can move on.
Irreducible complexity is, if you think about it, machines are made of different parts. Say a lawnmower, it's got a blade, it's got a motor, wheels, stuff like that. But Darwin always insisted that his theory had to work by numerous successive slight modifications. It had to be very, very gradual. But if you're trying to build a machine,
in 160
like
years.
Can I just quickly interrupt? New Life, NP Life apologist. He says, well, this is Bunk, PBS Nova documentary collection, Life's Rocky Start, new documentary. Go watch the documentary also done by Nova about the Kitzmiller versus Dover case, which is literally what this character that looks like an egg that is rolled in dog hair is talking about. And he hasn't learned since 2005 when he was proven wrong on multiple accounts when it comes to irreducible complexity and his stupid machine theory. That has been debunked. So that's almost 20 years ago.
It's been a very long time, yes. So, Jeremy, no, the biology was not peer-reviewed. The math was. If you start with the bad assumptions that the waiting time problem does, for example, like if you ignore that recombination happens and you assume a target sequence, then yes, you're going to get ridiculously long times. However, that is contrary to how anyone does population genetics, especially with regard to animals, which hominins are. So, find me someone who takes recombination into account and then come back to me.
It's also important to note the peer-reviewed article in particular is like more into the theoretical aspect of biology, which does not review the assumptions. It reviews as you said, it reviews the math and the logic not the assumptions themselves.
Right. They just say, if you assume these parameters, is this math correct? And what the people did at the theoretical,
theoretical biology and medical
they
modeling.
Said, if you assume those parameters, then yes, this math is correct. The problem isn't the math. The problem is the assumptions. If you assume that none of these organisms are doing recombination, then yeah, it's going to take a long time. The only problem is they do actually do recombination. It's so silly.
Didn't Storm Cornell discuss this paper in a video?
He did. Yes, he has. Yeah. So, and that's again why Sanford is a hack. He has to publish his articles in these journals with very low impact factors because he knows he can't publish anywhere else.
Also, I find it strange. Like he in this particular paper, he apparently argues that there is a waiting time problem because the substitution rate is too slow. But then he also argues that that humans have a very high substitution rate in order to get the timeline right for like Noah and such.
Yeah. Like I said, these guys are hacks.
All right. Yeah.
Also, he said, how long does it take for or what is it? He mentioned about mutations fixing in a population. Well, lots of mutations have fixed in, for instance, the Richard Lenski E. coli experiment. In the population that had the CIT plus mutation, that mutant went to fixation in the population, along with a bunch of other mutations. So lots of mutations have gone to fixation in those populations. You don't even know how wrong you are. Okay, we can keep going.
Lawnmower or a mousetrap.
I like the mousetrap because that's so simple. Even I can get it in my head.
Yeah. Just think of a mechanical mousetrap. It's got a number of different pieces. Now, if you wanted to build something like that slowly and have each part or each intermediate work,
you get the tie clip that Kenneth Miller wore during the court case that you were debunked.
You've got a big problem because it needs all of the parts to work. It needs a spring, a wooden base, a couple other metal parts. And just to capture that concept, I invented the phrase irreducible complexity because it's complex, can't reduce it, or
Take
else
away one piece and it just doesn't work.
And the mousetrap doesn't work.
Right. Yeah. Therefore, it could
Except
not.
It does work.
The mousetrap. Take away one piece from one of these fantastically complicated machines in a cell, it doesn't function, and therefore could not have conferred an adaptive advantage.
Right.
And let's pause that again. So again, the problem is it might not function as a mousetrap, but it still has a function. That's co-option or acceptation, whatever you want to call it. And that was explained to Behe, as Peter just said, like 20 years ago.
Yes.
And he still doesn't get it.
Well,
to this day, he still does not understand.
I am convinced that he did get it. He is now just lying because he can't go back on his position without losing his face in the young Earth creationist community. He's flat out lying to people, which is, I think, dishonest. But that's my take.
No, you're right.
And people can try and convince me otherwise. He got it during that court case. He definitely got it, that he was wrong. But he still sticks to the part where the mousetrap has to function as a mousetrap. No, it doesn't. We know this because you were educated on the bacterial flagellum to the point where the judge at some point said, "Oh, goody," and I think it was Ken Miller who said, "I feel like Zsa Zsa Gabor's 10th husband. I know what to do, but I don't know how to make it interesting anymore." It is been debunked to death. I mean, and we have a super chat.
From Who's Your Buddy says for $20, if they think a mousetrap is complex, the internal combustion engine is going to blow their minds. Thank you very much for those $20. Very kind. Yeah. So a lot of things in biology, there is this assumption that, or I guess from people like Behe, that if it has some function now, it always had that function, and that is just not true. Feathers are a good example. Feathers did not start as a flying apparatus. Feathers started originally for insulation and for signaling. And we can see that because they are on organisms that clearly cannot fly long before they show up on organisms that can fly, like birds.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were to look at feathers today and you were to say, like, feathers at this point in the fossil record were too small to support flying, therefore they couldn't have been adaptive. Well, yeah, they couldn't have supported flight at that point, but they weren't being used for flight at that point. They're being used for other purposes. The ATP synthase, the part that hooks into the membrane, is a helicase, right? And the function of a helicase is to unzip DNA. So that's not it. So hooking the rest of the enzyme structure to a cell membrane was not its original function. That is its acquired function. So if you tried arguing that this was what it did, like, oh, well, how did a helicase, evolve to stick into the membrane? No, you're looking at it from the completely wrong angle.
Jackson, you got it wrong. You got it wrong. You are being corrected in chat.
Feathers evolved as stuffing for the crania of creationists from Stephen Meyer. You are correct. Yeah.
I love it. By the way, PC, since you're here, thank you so much for debunking that paper about prayer curing blindness. That was incredibly kind of you to do. So my thanks. That was
really good.
And I'm going to confront the guy who put it to me. So, but he hasn't surfaced since I countered him 2 weeks ago. For some reason, he's not ready to go back and make YouTube videos anymore, because he is on an open panel, and I will jump in. So the moment that happens, I will confront him. But paper. Wasn't really paper, was it? But anyway, I wanted to thank you.
That was a really good article.
Yeah. I found it very confusing.
Really good article.
From what I had, and the fact that it's made the blog is incredible. So thank you. Okay, continue.
All right, we can keep going.
Could not be built gradually and improving each step of the way.
Intermediate stages confer no functional advantage. Therefore, there's nothing for natural selection to select on the way from the simple to the complex.
Okay. Michael, does that? What interests me greatly about that is the gradual building up is a stepwise ascent. Whereas, am I right in saying that contemporary biologists like Dennis Noble, whom I mentioned, are saying, but look, you have to take the whole cell into consideration, that this is top-down causation, and that would frustrate any concept of building things up anyway by numerous
Lennox is just lying.
Is that fair to say?
That is not what Dennis Noble says. Noble is like a normal biologist. He accepts evolution. Lennox is just lying. That Noble is not saying that actually it's all top-down design. No, nowhere does he say that. I've read some of his papers. He's just a normal evolutionary biologist. He just has he thinks that some mechanisms should be taken more into account. That's it.
But I suspect he's referring to him saying that instead of looking just at the genes, we need to look at the whole cell and also acknowledge the epigenetic mechanisms.
And that's fine.
Go around.
That's fine. Probably. That's all normal biology. What do you want? Oh my goodness. So Lennox here is just distorting the truth. So anyway, surprise. All right, we can keep going.
Continue. Okay.
You have left Darwin far behind.
Yes.
And you've left randomness far behind.
But they are doing that. They're leaving it far behind.
But top-down is actually a metaphor for the action of an agent in
Yes.
arranging things with a plan
that's
in mind.
dangerous
Yes,
stuff.
right.
You see, John Lennox just swats Darwin aside. For the two of you, it's a much more agonizing process. You try very hard to be fair to the man. Two quotations, Michael, two quotations. Charles Darwin
can't
on the
help-
origin.
Can you pause for a
Darwin
moment, please?
himself writes.
I can't help but like while we're watching this video of just imagining like three guys in like very warm, snuggly jackets that don't let you move your arms very much, all just kind of laughing about how the warden's a nice guy or a bad guy, I guess. You know, it really just, these guys are so removed from reality. They're in their own little world, and there's nothing you can say or do to convince them that they're wrong. There's no amount of math you can show John Lennox, not that he cares to look at it because population genetics is a field. You know, there's no amount of paleontology you can show Meyer or cell stuff you can show Behe. They don't care. They're never going to care. Whatever. Anyway, you're saying?
Behe says that a noble is not a normal biologist. Like he
has a better theory than evolution.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, he does. The extended synthesis guys are, I don't know. I do think it's weird that they say like no one's taking like epigenetics seriously or like what is it, mutation bias or things like this, and it's like, well, biologists are taking these ideas seriously, and they are and have been incorporating them into the theory for like over a decade now. It's like, what do you want? I don't know. I've interacted with a few people like that on Twitter, and the conversation always kind of comes to like, what amount of inclusion of these ideas would make you like feel that they're being adequately fleshed out? And from my experience interacting with these guys, there isn't really ever an answer. They're just like, I want it more. It's like, okay, cool, I guess. I don't know. Have you ever bumped into them, Nestling, like on Twitter?
Who?
Like any of the extended synthesis guys who are like...
No, not really.
Okay, I've only bumped into them like a handful of times, but I don't know. Oh well. Also,
I see, like in the blog that PZ linked, I see that apparently the Noble also advocates for a form of Lamarckian evolution.
I've heard that. Yeah, I've heard that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, that's part of the thing with like the cell, right? With incorporating the whole cell is like he thinks the cell feeds back to the DNA, so there's like this two-way evolution going on. Also, again, with like with Lennox, he's not a biologist, right? He's a mathematician, and the idea that he just swats aside evolution. I hate that they keep referring to evolution as Darwin or Darwinism, because it isn't, and it hasn't been for a very long time. But it's just silly. It's like he's done no research. He's done nothing to counter the theory whatsoever. He just pretends that he has. It's kind of pathetic, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we can keep going.
If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous, successive, slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. Close quote.
But I can think of no such examples.
Right there.
Yeah.
That was the next sentence. I can think of no such cases.
Mm-hmm.
Why do they never include that other little sentence? So weird. They never put it in there.
It's as if they might not want it to be out. I mean, same thing with
Weird.
the evolution of the eye, right? So they will...
Right, yeah.
Yeah. I mean...
Always the first quote, never the second.
Never the several pages that come after it explaining how we got the eye. Even back then. Yeah, still, yeah. Okay.
In 1859, here's Michael Behe. The question then becomes, are there irreducibly complex systems in the cell? Yes, there are many.
Absolutely. As I said, the cell is chock full of machines. Machines need many parts. They can't be built by numerous successive slight modifications. But let me draw attention to one little sneaky trick that Darwin put into that quotation. He says, if it could be demonstrated that something couldn't possibly happen. Right. So he's putting a burden on his opponents to prove a negative, which science cannot do and never has. No theory has ruled out all rival theories to be accepted. But we have great evidence and
No. That is not what he's doing. Darwin is saying, Darwin first looks at a bunch of examples and says, all of these fall within evolutionary theory. These all seem to be explicable on my theory. But if someone can provide me with an example of a feature that cannot be explained by my theory, that I just haven't come across, then my theory would break down. He's not saying to prove a negative. He's just saying provide me an example that doesn't fit, which is not hard. I mean, like in theory, if they're all over the place, should be easy to find, right? You would think. But actually, evolution does build irreducibly complex systems. It does. And so if evolution can build irreducibly complex systems, and then you happen to find one, you can't conclude, therefore, that that's evidence for design. Because you can have like subfunctionalization, for instance, where instead of a gene having like two functions, it has one function and then another gene takes over the other function. So now you can't lose either one of those or else the system just collapses. But originally it was only one gene who did that. That happens. Like we see that for lots of different organisms. For instance, well, to give an example, gulo, which is a pseudogene that, well, it's a gene that animals have, but it has become pseudogenized in primates and then a few other groups differentially. But in haplorine primates, so tarsiers, monkeys, apes, it's broken. However, and so these organisms, these animals are not producing vitamin C, but they get vitamin C through their diet. So because they're already getting vitamin C from their environment, they don't have to have a gene producing it. So now it's okay if a mutation happens which inactivates that pseudogene. Now, if it is the case that suddenly all the plants that produce fruits with vitamin C die, well, primates are screwed, right? It's
at least most of them, yeah.
Yeah, everything except like lemurs. The rest of us are all screwed. So yeah, that happens. That's an irreducibly complex system.
For once, the lemurs are getting the upside of the deal. But now they are screwed. Yeah.
Right, exactly. But like that's an irreducibly complex system, right? Like haplorine primates will not be able to live now without ingesting vitamin C through their diet. They have to. So
it's like I think the one named Herman Muller described like a two-step process. Like you have a system, you add a new part, and then the next step is you make the part necessary, and that's how you build a irreducible system.
Right. And now if you try to take it away, the system collapses because it's now irreducibly complex.
One example in construction is the scaffold. Like you build an arch using a scaffold, and then you remove the scaffold, and then now the whole arch, like every part of the arch, is necessary to keep the whole structure up.
Right. Yeah, but if evolution can build irreducibly complex structures, which we know it can, then the existence of an irreducibly complex structure cannot, by definition, be evidence for intelligent design. So his argument is done. It's fallen apart. He would have to come up with a way to distinguish irreducibly complex structures designed by intelligence from those designed by evolution, and to date, he has not done that.
What I would like to see is these three people in this video, Behe, Lennox, and Meyer, if you want to push irreducibly complex systems, and you claim that those are intelligently designed, then come up with a mechanism how this intelligent designer created it. That is where you fall flat, because I've never seen a single creationist come up with a mechanism on how to get it.
God wiggled his nose, clearly.
Yeah.
That's what he did. Wiggled his nose, snapped his fingers, tapped his toes.
There was
the flagellum.
There was one guy that Arn Ra had on his channel twice, and this guy said it was quantum mechanics, and Arn pushed him on it, and he said, "Okay, how does God do it?" And he said, "The same way we do it." He said, "God has arms and labs and machinery." No, God didn't have that. So how did he do it? Well, a quantum mechanics. That's not an answer. It's not a mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
It is you weaseling out of the question. But I don't know. Maybe he went on Grindr, as NP Life apologist earlier said, and rubbed clay and metal plates, creating sparks. I don't know.
Well, on that note, I think we're gonna call it for today, because we got about 7 minutes till the 2-hour mark.
Okay.
So, what's going on?
Want to turn your camera back on, Jackson, or you don't want to risk it?
Oh, well, I guess we'll test the gods. I guess the internet gods. Hello, it was me.
There we go.
So what's going on for you guys?
So we had this week a really interesting conversation. We do still have a show where if you want to have a conversation with a specific person about a specific topic, then we will host your conversation. And we had Dr. Josh Bowen, who has a PhD in Assyriology, have a conversation with a young Earth creationist, which was, I think, a pretty interesting conversation. I'm really, really happy that we got to do that on our channel. This particular young Earth creationist seems to be someone who triggers other people, because I'm currently setting up another conversation with, because he's also part of Arn Ra's Blasphemers Bible study. He's the only Christian. He's the token Christian in the Bible study. Learning about the Bible with these satanic atheists. He's going to have a conversation with another panel member. And after that, he's going to have another conversation with someone that most of us might know, Jen with one N, who also got really triggered when he came on our channel. So, and then we have a few creationists still lined up. So I probably will have several shows in the coming weeks. Still waiting for people to respond on times, but it is coming up.
Nice. I've been trying to get. There's a guy on Twitter I was talking to earlier today, and I was trying to get him on the channel. We'll see if he bites, though. I don't know. What about you, Nestle? What's going on over on your end?
Nothing. I'm still busy with my own personal life, so which I can't really tell. But I'm doing fine for the most part.
Well, good.
And you have another super chat, Jackson.
Oh, did we? I'm sorry. Oops, I just turned it off. From Jake Nelson, $10. Thank you, Jackson Peter Nestle. Well, thank you.
Thank you,
Nelson. We really appreciate it. Very kind of you. Let's see. The next video on this channel is going to be, the next scripted video is The Peacock's Tale, in which we'll talk about sexual selection. Ooh, that'll be fun.
Mm-hmm.
And so not just So this will be female mate choice because in the elephant seal's tail, we talked about the law of battle, so in which males compete for females. Oh, what'd you say, Nestling?
Oh, no, I just like a.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. So this will be female mate choice. That'll be the other, major mechanism of sexual selection that Darwin proposed, and we'll talk about all the updates and the different fights that evolutionary biologists have had over sexual selection. Because, fun fact, female mate choice has been very contentious as a hypothesis over the last 100 years. It's kind of funny, honestly. So, I don't know. So that'll be that. And then there's a few more birds. And then we leave the amniotes behind forever. Once, I don't know if I've said, I think I've said this before. But once we finish the ancestor's tale, in 3,000 years, we'll start a new series on this book titled Inconvenient Facts Al Gore Doesn't Want You to Know, by this guy named Gregory Wrightstone, who is a geologist. So he's writing about why climate change isn't real. So that'll be fun. We'll do a whole series on that. Not like this, not like where we read Did Man Get Here by Evolution or by Creation? It'll actually be a scripted series where we'll do it like chapter by chapter, just to be thorough and go through everything. And
you mean record or live still?
No, it'll be scripted.
Oh, scripted. And recorded.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it'll be recorded. So we'll do that after we finish the Ancestors' Tale series. So that'll be fun.
Or you could do like you could do notes and then do a live stream, but maybe too much work.
I would rather do a recorded one, just so that we can like nail all of our all the points on. We can get all our ducks in a row and everything, so we don't miss anything. There was something else I wanted to say. I can't remember now. Perks of getting old, right, guys?
I'm being mauled on camera. Well, just below.
You're
you
being
can
mauled.
see. Yes.
He heard Jackson saying it's almost the end of the stream, and that's his cue.
For some reason, it is a cue when I go back to these screens. Somehow my dog gets triggered and say, "Okay, it's over now."
Oh.
So now you can give me some attention.
Said, "How do you find time for your classes? I'm totally swamped." Are you referring to me? My classes. Let's see. I TA 3 classes. I TA Bio 110 lab, Bio 120 lab, and then the botany lab. And I mean, they're not bad. I like them. I have a good time with them. The botany lab is fairly rough for students, but it is what it is. Let's see. So I don't know. Then really the big thing I'm working on right now in like real life is I headlock the dog.
Give him a boop. Give him a boop on the snoot.
Yeah.
I went and worked on my thesis for a few hours today in the lab, so that was fun. And I've got a bunch of papers to grade. I'm grading lab reports for the 120 lab, and oof, so much fun. All right. Well, anyway. Alrighty. Well, thank you guys for coming on today, and thank you everybody in the live chat for watching. And we will see all of you next time.
Bye, everyone.